Live Breakfast with Nikki Campbell and Rachel Burden.
Parliament has been urged to make it illegal to publish photos of children without their parents' consent. This follows a campaign by the wife of the rock star Paul Weller, who won a High Court battle last year over unpixelated photos of their children published by a newspaper website. Hannah Weller's cause is being supported by the Labour peer Angela Smith, who's raised it in the Lords. The government says it believes a balance has to be struck between privacy and free speech. We can speak to Hannah Weller now. Morning.
Hello.
And also Tim Dawson, Vice President of the National Union of Journalists. Hi, Tim.
Good morning.
Hannah, first of all, what happened with your children?
Well, it was in October 2012. We were on holiday in LA and my husband took the children out for the afternoon shopping, and they were followed around by a freelance photographer, which was an unpleasant experience in itself. But the worst thing about it was that the photographs ended up on the Mail Online, which was very scary for me as a mother.
Why scary?
Because I'd always been very careful to protect my children's privacy and to not expose them on the internet or in the mass media. And so to have that decision taken away from me and to have them exposed in that way raised lots of fears for me, for their security and their safety, and just generally the infringement on their right to privacy.
And how old are they? How old were they at the time?
They were 10 months old at the time, and also my stepdaughter, who was 16 at the time, was also photographed.
We should put the Mail's line on this across. They said at the time, the Wellers had previously chosen to open up their private family life to public gaze to a significant degree, and the pictures were innocuous.
It's not true that we'd opened our family's private life up. What they're referring to is my husband, when talking to journalists about his latest record, he'd mentioned the fact that he has children, or we'd recently had twins, so it was quite normal for the journalist to be saying, how are the sleepless nights, etc. And so he'd spoken about them, but we'd never given images out. And actually, when I was in hospital having just given birth to the children, we were approached by a glossy magazine asking for a photograph of them, an official photograph, and when we declined, their response was that if we didn't give them one, they would have a photographer waiting outside our house when we got home, which is an awful thing for a new mother to have to worry about, and is just something that wouldn't happen if this legislation that I'm calling for came into place, where it's not okay to publish photographs of children and to expose their identity and to violate their privacy without the consent of the parents.
Tim Dawson, on the face of it, that sounds reasonable.
It does. I have sympathy with the Wellers, and I don't defend their being hassled by a paparazzi, and they have clearly sought legal redress. I mean, and that is still a live legal case, so I'm kind of inclined not to talk about that, in too much detail. But creating a law on the basis of a single unhappy experience, I think, is a very damaging prospect. Thousands of pictures appear in newspapers and magazines every day of children and young people, and actually the children and their families are delighted that they're there.
Then they consent.
Well, they do, but not with the kind of written consent that you appear to be asking for. Now, I'm not quite clear what you are asking for, and you keep talking about making it illegal, which suggests to me that you're trying to invoke the criminal law, which would be extraordinary. But thousands of people whose pictures...
Suggestion.
Well, if I might make my point... All these pictures that appear in newspapers, were it a requirement that written authority was obtained from the parents of every single one of them, the effect that it would have is that children and young people, in fact probably people under about 25, because editors would have to make a guess at how old many people were, they would simply disappear from our newspapers, all because a tiny number of people have had unhappy experiences which actually they've had the wherewithal to go to court and deal with. So this really, I mean, to call it a sledgehammer to crack a nut is to understate the extent of this being an absurd proposal to deal with a very small number of unhappy experiences.
Can I just explain something that the NUJ seems to have misinterpreted about the aims of my campaign? And that is that, quite simply, where you are hoping to identify a child by name or affiliation in a photograph, and where they are the main focus of the photograph or the article, it is not unreasonable to seek consent. If you can identify them, then you know who they are, you know who their parents are, and you can seek consent. Where there is a crowd shot, or where you're just taking a photograph of Trafalgar Square or Regent's Park or whatever, and there happen to be children in the background, that's not that doesn't pose a direct risk to the child. And
what if it's a group of children on a May Day gay parade, for example?
If they're not identified, then...
Well, they would be. They are quite easily identified in those kinds of pictures. So what happens then?
Do you mean if they're identified by name?
Well, if you can see their faces clearly.
If you can see their faces but they're not identified by name, that doesn't pose a direct risk to the child, and so would be exempt from any new law. And just to answer Tim's question earlier about whether or not we're seeking civil or criminal legislation, I'm open to any suggestions. I'm a mum who sees a problem and who is concerned for the safety of our children, and so I am applying to the government to ask them for their advice and for their help. If they feel that the best redress is through civil legislation, then I will support that. If they feel that it's a criminal issue, then I will support that too.
Tim, I just have another thought on this. If you publish photos of your children on social media, on Facebook or on Twitter or whatever, does that then undermine any case you might have if you found yourself in the situation that Hannah's describing?
Well, to be perfectly honest, if you publish pictures on social media, you enter a whole murky world of what rights you might or might not be assigning those to people. And you know, there is no straightforward answer. Theoretically, the person who creates an image is the owner of the copyright in it, and they, in law, theoretically, are able to control where and when that's published. So depending, and unless you grant to someone like Facebook or to Twitter some assignment of those rights, then you can technically prevent that from spreading like wildfire, as it were. In practice, of course, many social media organisations acquire some rights in pictures that are posted onto them, and anyway, anybody can lift them. So if you wish to maintain a degree of privacy, my advice would be to be very, very careful about the pictures that one allows to appear in social media.
That's all interesting. Very briefly,
return to the question? I mean, I can find no evidence of widespread unhappiness with the way in which photographs of children and young people are published in the press. The cases that are mentioned on your website are cases where people have successfully gone to law and won their cases. People like Adele and J.K. Rowling. Well, of ordinary people making complaints, say to the Press Complaints Commission or IPSO, I can't find a weight of people who are unhappy that it's happened.
OK, we're going to have to leave it there.
Complaints.
But thank you very much to both of you, Tim Dawson from the NUJ and Hannah Weller, wife of Paul Weller, as well. Thanks for your time. It's 8:44.
And